The morning sun rose over New like it had for the past 47 years since humans first settled this world. Children walked to school through streets lined with flowering trees brought from Earth. Farmers tended fields of wheat and corn that stretched to the horizon. In the capital city of Haven, 2.3 million people went about their lives without knowing that this would be their last peaceful day. Commander Lisa Morgan stood in the orbital defense station watching cargo ships come and go. She was 34 years old with short brown hair and tired eyes that had seen too many quiet shifts. New was a farming colony on the edge of human space, far from any conflict, far from any danger. Her job was mostly paperwork and maintenance schedules. She often joked with her younger brother that she was the most bored military officer in the galaxy. That changed at 9:47 in the morning when her sensor officer, a young man named Danny Park, called out in confusion. Something was emerging from hyperspace at the edge of the system. Not one ship, not 10 ships. 47 vessels dropped out of the void in perfect formation, their hulls dark and angular, their weapons already powering up. Lisa felt her blood turn cold. She recognized those ship designs from intelligence briefings. The Dominion, a militaristic empire that had been expanding aggressively for centuries, consuming weaker species, enslaving populations, burning worlds that resisted. Humanity had no treaty with them, no formal contact. They had simply stayed out of each other's way. Until now. She immediately contacted Governor Shaw on the surface. Shaw was an older man, a former diplomat who had spent his career building bridges between species. He refused to believe the had come for war. There must be some misunderstanding, he said, some diplomatic channel they could open. Lisa watched on her screens as Shaw broadcast messages of peace on every frequency. He spoke of friendship and cooperation. He offered to negotiate any grievance. He practically begged for communication. The fleet moved toward New in complete silence. They did not respond to any transmission. They did not slow down. They did not hesitate. The colony's defense fleet consisted of 12 patrol ships designed for anti-piracy operations. Lisa ordered them to form a defensive line while she called for evacuation transports. She knew they could not win. She knew those 12 ships and their brave crews were going to die. But every minute they bought was another minute for civilians to reach escape vessels. Captain commanded the lead patrol ship. He was Lisa's friend, a man she had served with for 6 years. His last transmission was calm and professional. He reported that his weapons were having minimal effect on shields. He reported that 3 of his ships were already destroyed. He told Lisa to get as many people out as she could. Then his signal went dead. On the surface, chaos erupted. Governor Shaw finally accepted the truth when plasma bombardment began falling on Haven. Buildings that had stood for decades vanished in columns of fire. The beautiful streets with their flowering trees became rivers of ash. People ran in every direction, screaming, searching for loved ones, trying to reach the spaceport. Lisa coordinated with what remained of her staff to guide evacuation. Transport ships launched one after another, but fighters hunted them down with terrible efficiency. She watched helplessly as vessels packed with families exploded in the upper atmosphere. Her brother called her from the surface. He was a teacher at one of the schools, and he had gathered nearly 100 children in the basement of his building. He wanted to know where to go, what to do. Lisa told him to head for the northern spaceport where one transport was still loading. She told him to run. The bombardment intensified. They were not just attacking military targets. They were systematically destroying everything. Hospitals, schools, farms, residential areas. This was not conquest. This was extermination. Lisa made a decision that would haunt her for the rest of her life. She ordered the last available transport to the northern spaceport and commanded her station crew to evacuate. She stayed at her console, directing the transport's approach, providing what little sensor data she could to help it avoid enemy fighters. 847 people made it onto that transport. was among them, along with 32 of his students. Lisa felt a moment of desperate relief when she confirmed his on the passenger manifest. Then she had to leave. The station was taking fire, its hull breaching in multiple sections. She ran for the escape pod bay with Danny Park and 2 other officers. They launched just as the station exploded behind them. The escape pod was picked up by the fleeing transport. Lisa climbed aboard and immediately went to the observation deck. She needed to see. She needed to witness. New burned below them. The entire continent where Haven had stood was covered in fire. Smoke rose in columns so thick they were visible from orbit. The ships moved methodically across the planet, their weapons never stopping, ensuring that nothing survived. Lisa stood at that window for 3 hours as the transport fled toward the hyperspace jump point. She watched until Nu was just a point of light behind them. She watched until there was nothing left to see. Found her there. He was covered in dust and his hands were shaking. He had lost students in the chaos. Children he had been responsible for. He did not speak. He just stood beside his sister and watched their home disappear. The transport carried 847 survivors. That was all that remained of 2.3 million people. Everyone else was gone. Parents, children, friends, lovers. An entire world erased in less than 6 hours. Lisa did not cry. She did not scream. She simply stood at that window and made a silent promise to the dead. Earth would know what happened here. The galaxy would know. And somehow, someday, there would be an answer. The transport jumped to hyperspace, leaving behind a graveyard where a colony had once thrived. Behind them, the Dominion declared victory and moved on, confident that they had taught humanity its proper place in the universe. They had no idea what they had just awakened. The transport limped into Earth orbit 3 weeks after the massacre. Its hull was from near misses during the escape. Its engines were failing. Its passengers had survived on emergency rations and recycled water, but they had made it. They had brought the truth home. Lisa Morgan was the first to be brought before the United Earth Council. She stood in the great chamber where humanity's leaders gathered, surrounded by representatives from every nation and every colony. Behind her, massive screens showed the footage recovered from news defense systems. The council watched in silence as their people died. Lisa spoke for 2 hours. She described the attack in detail, from the first sensor contact to the final bombardment. She gave names and numbers. She explained that they had not attempted communication, had not offered terms, had not shown any interest in anything but complete annihilation. When she finished, there was no sound in the chamber. Men and women who had built careers on political argument sat motionless, unable to find words. The footage spread across every human world within days. People gathered in public squares to watch. They saw the plasma raining down on schools. They saw families running through burning streets. They saw the moment when the last defense ship exploded, and something changed in the human spirit. Something that had been sleeping since the species first reached for the stars woke up. Admiral Cole watched the footage in her private office at Fleet Command. She was 61 years old, a career officer who had commanded ships and task forces for 3 decades. Her face showed no emotion as the images played, but her hands gripped the arms of her chair until her knuckles turned white. When the footage ended, she contacted Defense Secretary Price. They met in a secure room deep beneath the Alps, a bunker built centuries ago during humanity's internal wars. What they discussed was known to fewer than 50 people in all of human space. Humanity had not been idle during its 2 centuries among the stars. While presenting a peaceful face to the galaxy, while building trade relationships and signing non-aggression pacts, Earth's greatest scientists had been working on something else entirely. They called it the Prometheus Project, named for the god who brought fire to mankind. It was humanity's insurance policy against exactly this kind of attack. Admiral Cole reviewed the weapon specifications with grim satisfaction. Gravitational compression, warheads capable of destabilizing stellar cores. Stealth drives that could hide entire fleets from the most advanced sensors. Electromagnetic pulse systems that could disable planetary defense networks. These weapons had never been tested in combat. Most of Earth's own military leadership did not know they existed. Price asked the question that history would remember: do we have the will to use them? Cole thought about new. She thought about 2.3 million dead civilians. She thought about the children. Yes, she said, we do. The Dominion, meanwhile, celebrated their easy victory. High Commander, the architect of the attack, addressed his people from the steps of the Grand Temple on there. He spoke of human weakness and superiority. He mocked the pathetic defense fleet that had melted before his weapons. He declared that humanity would soon learn to kneel or be erased entirely. His government sent a formal message to Earth. It was not a declaration of war because, in their view, there was nothing to declare. Humanity was simply an infestation that needed to be cleared from 17 colony worlds that they had decided they wanted. The message gave Earth 60 standard days to evacuate those worlds or face the same fate as new. The galaxy watched with familiar resignation. This was how things worked among the stars. Younger species were pushed aside by older ones. It was the natural order. They had been expanding for centuries, and no one had been able to stop them. What could humans possibly do that dozens of other species had failed to accomplish? The United Earth Council met in emergency session. The vote was unanimous. Not a single representative argued for compliance. Not a single voice suggested that humanity should abandon its people to save itself. They voted for war. But this would not be an ordinary war. The Council authorized Admiral Cole to use whatever means necessary to ensure that they would never threaten humanity again. They gave her access to the Prometheus Project and full authority to deploy its weapons. They asked only one thing in return: that she succeed. Cole began assembling Task Force Reckoning in secret. She selected 37 ships and crews who had volunteered for what everyone understood was likely a one-way mission. She moved them to a staging area in deep space, far from any hyperspace routes, far from any sensors that might report their position. Lisa Morgan requested a transfer to the task force. She was not a ship commander, not a weapons officer, but she had survived new. She had watched her world die. Cole understood what that meant, and she approved the transfer. On Earth, memorials were held for the dead. Morgan attended the one in Washington, standing among thousands of other survivors and mourners. He placed flowers at the base of a wall where names were still being engraved. It would take months to add them all. He did not know that his sister was already aboard a warship heading into the darkness. He did not know what Earth was planning. He only knew that the universe suddenly felt very cold, and that they were still out there, still celebrating, still laughing at human grief. That laughter would not last much longer. Task Force Reckoning moved through the void like a ghost. 37 ships traveling in perfect formation, their experimental stealth drives bending sensor waves around them, making them invisible to any technology the galaxy had ever developed. They had been in transit for 18 days, following a route that avoided every known hyperspace lane, every inhabited system, every possible witness. Lisa Morgan stood in the engineering bay of the flagship Endurance, watching Chief Engineer Victor run diagnostics on the weapons systems. Victor was a small man with gray hair and gentle eyes that seemed wrong on someone working with instruments of such destruction. He had helped design these weapons 20 years ago, never believing they would actually be used. He explained to Lisa what they were carrying. The gravitational compression warheads worked by creating an artificial singularity within a star's core. The immense gravitational forces would destabilize the fusion process, causing a cascade reaction that would lead to stellar collapse. It was not an explosion in the traditional sense. It was something far worse. The star would essentially eat itself. then release all that compressed energy in a supernova that would sterilize everything within 12 light minutes. Lisa asked him if he was troubled by what they were about to do. Victor was quiet for a long moment. Then he said that he had on Earth. He said that he had seen the footage from New like everyone else. He said that they had made their intentions clear. It was not conquest they wanted. It was extinction. And when someone tries to exterminate your entire species, you do not have the luxury of moral hesitation. Admiral Cole called a fleet-wide briefing. Her face appeared on screens throughout all 37 ships. She looked tired but resolute, a woman who had accepted the weight of what she was about to order. She told them the truth. Some of them would not survive this mission. The home system was heavily defended, and even with their advanced weapons, the task force would take losses. But she also told them that this was the only way to ensure humanity's survival. They would not stop with 17 colonies. They would keep coming until every human world was ash, unless someone taught them that humanity was not prey. The crews listened in silence. There were no protests, no questions, no signs of doubt. These men and women had volunteered knowing the risks. They had seen what happened to New. They understood what was at stake. Back in space, High Commander reviewed intelligence reports with growing amusement. Human activity had decreased across all monitored sectors. Their fleet movements were minimal. Their diplomatic channels were focused entirely on pleading for extended deadlines and peaceful resolutions. His advisors interpreted this as fear. The humans were paralyzed, unable to accept their situation but equally unable to resist. Predicted that they would abandon the 17 demanded worlds before the deadline and retreat to their core systems, where they would wait in terror for the next demand. He did not bother to increase security around the home system. Why would he? No enemy had ever reached prime in 400 years of expansion. The home fleet of over 200 warships was more than sufficient to crush any threat. What did not know was that his intelligence network had been carefully fed false information. The passive diplomatic messages were automated. The minimal fleet movements were decoys. The real human response was already closer to his than any enemy had ever been. On the Endurance, Lisa spent her off-duty hours walking the corridors and talking to the crew. She met young officers barely out of training who had never seen combat. She met veterans who had served for decades and thought their fighting days were over. She met engineers, medics, navigation specialists, weapons technicians. Every one of them had a story. Every one of them had someone they loved back home. She found herself on the observation deck late one night, watching the stars slip past. They were beautiful out here, far from any sun, just endless points of light against the infinite black. It was hard to believe that one of those distant specks was about to die because of what humans carried in their cargo bays. A young pilot named joined her at the window. Was 23 years old, one of the fighter pilots who would provide cover during the attack. She asked Lisa what New had been like before the attack. Lisa told her about the flowering trees and the wide fields of grain. She told her about the way the sunset turned the sky orange and purple over the mountains. She told her about her brother's school and the children who had filled its classrooms with laughter. She told her about a world that had been peaceful and beautiful and full of hope. Listened without interrupting. When Lisa finished, the young pilot said something that stayed with Lisa for the rest of her life. She said that they were not going to prime for revenge. Revenge was personal and small. They were going to make sure that no other human world would ever have to become another New. Admiral Cole made one final transmission to Earth Command before they entered communication blackout range. She reported that the task force was on schedule and that crew morale was high. She requested that if they did not return, their families be told that they died protecting humanity's future. Then the transmission ended, and Task Force Reckoning vanished into the darkness between stars. The deadline was in 42 days, the expected surrender. They would receive something else entirely. Task Force Reckoning emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the system like wolves entering a sleeping village. The stealth drives had brought them closer than any enemy had ever reached, past the outer sensor networks, past the patrol routes, into the heart of power. Admiral Cole stood on the bridge of the Endurance, studying the tactical display. Before her lay the seat of an empire. 4 inhabited worlds orbited the yellow star called. 300 million lived on those worlds. The largest military shipyard in their territory hung in orbit around the second planet. 217 warships patrolled the system, confident in their strength. She gave the order to drop stealth and begin the attack. High Commander was in his private chambers when the alert came. He did not believe it at first. 37 human ships had appeared inside his home system without any warning, without triggering any sensor, without being detected by any patrol. It was impossible. Yet there they were on his screens, already engaging his outer defensive line. He rushed to the command center and took personal control of the fleet. His confidence returned quickly. 37 ships against 217. The humans had come to die gloriously, nothing more. He ordered his forces to destroy them slowly, to capture survivors for interrogation, to make an example that the galaxy would never forget. The battle began with brutal intensity. Human ships fought with a ferocity that startled the commanders. They did not behave like a species facing extinction. They behaved like predators who had finally found their prey. Plasma fire and missile salvos filled the void. Ships exploded on both sides. Lisa Morgan was stationed at the secondary tactical console, coordinating damage reports and crew evacuations. She watched as the destroyer Valiant took a direct hit to its reactor and vanished in a ball of white fire. She watched as the cruiser Defiance rammed a battleship rather than let itself be boarded. She watched as human crews died by the hundreds, buying time with their lives. But time for what? Could not understand their strategy. The humans were pushing toward the inner system, toward itself, but they were not targeting his worlds. They were not attempting to reach the shipyards or the population centers. They were fighting their way toward the star. Admiral Cole's plan required the Endurance to break through the defensive line. 7 ships were assigned to clear a path. 4 of those ships were destroyed in the attempt. The other 3, burning and broken, managed to create an opening just wide enough for the flagship to slip through. The Endurance accelerated toward at maximum speed. Interceptors pursued, their weapons tearing into the carrier's hull. Entire sections were breached. Fire suppression systems failed. Crew members were sucked into the void through ruptures in the outer plating. But the ship kept going. Victor worked in the weapons bay, preparing the gravitational compression warheads for deployment. His hands were steady despite the explosions shaking the deck beneath his feet. He had designed these weapons hoping they would never be used. Now he was about to prove that they worked. Finally realized what was happening. He screamed orders at his fleet, demanding that they stop the human carrier at any cost. But his ships were engaged across the system, tied down by the other human vessels that refused to retreat, refused to surrender, refused to stop fighting even as they were torn apart. The Endurance reached optimal deployment range. It was close enough to that the star filled half a massive ball of fire that had burned for 5 billion years. Admiral Cole looked at her crew. These men and women had followed her into hell. Many of them would not live to see the next hour. She owed them more than she could ever repay. "Launch," she said. 3 gravitational compression warheads streaked toward the star. They were small objects, almost invisible against the immense solar disk. They penetrated the corona and descended into the stellar core. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the star flickered. Watched his screens in horror as readings went insane. His gravitational signature was changing, increasing, collapsing inward. The fusion process that had sustained the star for billions of years began to fail. The core started compressing under its own suddenly intensified gravity. He tried to order evacuation. He tried to call for transport ships, but there was no time. The stellar collapse had begun, and it would not stop. Within hours would reach critical compression and release all its accumulated energy in a single cataclysmic explosion. Everything within 12 light minutes would be sterilized. All 4 worlds, all 300 million, all the shipyards and stations and defenses, everything. Lisa Morgan stood at the observation window as the Endurance retreated at maximum speed. Behind them was visibly changing, its surface rippling with impossible waves, its color shifting from yellow to angry orange to deep, terrible red. She thought about Nu. She thought about 2.3 million people who had done nothing wrong except exist in a place the wanted. She thought about children running through burning streets. She felt no joy. She felt no satisfaction. She felt only a hollow certainty that this was the price of survival in a universe where some species would not accept coexistence. The supernova came 6 hours later. Task Force Reckoning had escaped to the edge of the system by then, battered and bleeding, only 19 ships remaining from the original 37. They watched as the star collapsed one final time and then exploded outward with the light of 1 billion suns. The shockwave erased everything. Worlds that had existed for millions of years ceased to exist in seconds. 300 million lives ended in fire so intense that not even ash remained. Admiral Cole ordered the fleet to set course for home. Her voice was quiet, empty of triumph. They had done what they came to do. Now they had to live with it. The light from the supernova reached observation posts across the galaxy within weeks. Scientists and governments stared at their instruments in disbelief. A star had died, not from natural causes, not from some cosmic accident, but because a species that everyone had dismissed as young and weak had reached out and killed it. 300 million had perished in an instant. Their shipyards, their military command structure, their cultural treasures, their history. All of it was gone, replaced by an expanding cloud of plasma that would eventually cool into a new nebula. Future species would look at that nebula and wonder what had created it. They would not know that it was humanity's answer to genocide. The surviving colonies were scattered across 17 systems. They had lost their leaders, their largest fleet, their industrial capacity. More importantly, they had lost their certainty. For 400 years, they had believed themselves invincible. They had crushed every species that opposed them. They had never imagined that their empire could end in a single day. Their surrender came within a week. It was unconditional and absolute. Task Force Reckoning limped home to heroes' welcomes and memorial services. 19 ships had survived from the original 37. Over 4,000 crew members had died in the attack. Their names were added to the monument for Nu, their sacrifices honored alongside the civilians they had avenged. Admiral Cole refused all medals and promotions. She requested retirement and disappeared to a small farm on the outskirts of Paris, where she spent her remaining years growing vegetables and avoiding interviewers. When asked about the battle, she would say only that she had done what was necessary and that she hoped no one would ever have to do it again. The conquered of peaceful species, the loose alliance that governed galactic diplomacy, called an emergency session to address what they termed the human crisis. Dozens of alien delegations gathered in the Great Assembly Hall on the neutral world of 4. They had watched the bully younger species for centuries without intervening. Now they wanted to discuss condemning humanity for defending itself. Ambassador Maria Santos represented Earth at that session. She was a small woman with silver hair and calm eyes that had seen too much death in her long career. She listened patiently as species after species expressed their concern about human aggression and the dangerous precedent that had been set. When her turn came, she walked to the central podium and looked out at the assembled representatives. Some of them had traded with humanity. Some had signed non-aggression pacts. Some had simply ignored the young species, confident that humans would eventually be absorbed or destroyed by older civilizations. She began quietly. She told them about new, not the statistics, not the military details, but the reality. She told them about the children in Morgan's school who had huddled in a basement while plasma rained down above them. She told them about the families who had stood in line at evacuation points that never came. She told them about the 2.3 million ordinary people who had done nothing to provoke the attack that killed them. The chamber was silent. Maria's voice grew stronger. She said that humanity had not wanted war. Every diplomatic channel had been open. Every offer of negotiation had been made. They had responded with silence and then with fire. They had made their intentions clear. Surrender or die. Those were the only options they offered. She looked directly at the species who had criticized Earth's response. She asked them what they would have done. She asked if they would have evacuated 17 colonies and waited for the next demand. She asked if they would have watched their people die world by world until nothing remained. The silence continued. Maria Santos delivered her final message, the words that would be remembered for centuries. She said that humanity did not seek conflict. They wanted only to live among the stars as every species had the right to do. But if any civilization chose to threaten human survival, if any empire decided that humanity should be exterminated, then they should understand what would happen. Earth would not negotiate with those who offered only extinction. Earth would not surrender to those who killed children. Earth would do whatever was necessary to survive, no matter the cost to itself or its enemies. Let this be the lesson humanity teaches the galaxy, she said. We do not start wars, we end them. The conquered voted to take no action against Earth. Some species voted out of sympathy, others voted out of fear. The result was the same. Lisa Morgan returned to Earth 6 months after the battle. She had resigned her commission and wanted nothing more to do with military service. She found her brother at the new memorial in Washington, where he now worked as a volunteer guide, telling visitors about the colony that had been his home. They walked together through the marble halls where 2.3 million names were carved. Lisa stopped at the section dedicated to the children from school who had not made it to the transport in time. 32 had survived with him. 68 had not. Asked his sister if it was worth it. 300 million dead in exchange for 2.3 million humans. Was that justice or something else entirely? Lisa did not have an answer. She was not sure anyone did. She only knew that Earth was safe now. They would never threaten them again. And across the galaxy, other predatory species were quietly adjusting their expansion plans, removing human territory from their ambitions. Some lessons only needed to be taught once. The galaxy entered a new era. Humanity was no longer young or weak, or they were something else now. They were the species that had killed a star to protect their own. They were the species that would pay any price for survival. They were the species that other civilizations learned not to threaten. And in the darkness between stars, the light from death continued to spread, a permanent reminder of what happened when someone tried to exterminate the human race. The universe was vast and ancient and full of wonders. Humanity intended to see all of it.